stopped in his tracks. Yes, Donald Trump's sweeping Liberation Day tariff schedules have been struck down by a federal court. But how long will this court decision last? What happens next? And what does this mean for the power of President Trump? Well, my name's Tom Harwood and this is GBN Originals. It was late last night that the Federal Court of International Trade struck down the president's emergency tariff schedules, the so-called Liberation Day tariffs that instituted sweeping unilateral tariffs against other countries, a minimum 10% tariff, but ranging up to the far higher ranges that we've seen over the course of the last 2 months. Yes, these ranges have sometimes gone over 100%, but any fair-minded observer could see that these have been moving up and down a little bit, depending on which countries have been negotiating or promising negotiations. But there were companies that were upset about the president imposing these import taxes, companies that took these decisions to court, suggesting that the president does not have power unilaterally to impose these taxes, to impose these tariffs on foreign imports. So these decisions went further, went to judge, and finally a decision has been brought that this federal court decides that the president does not have it within his power to levy these taxes. Let's row back right to the 1780s. Yes, when the Federalist Papers were circulating and when the United States Constitution was being drafted. Then James Madison and Alexander Hamilton were having ideas and debates about what the power of the president should be. James Madison put forward the idea that ambition should be made to counteract ambition, that no one branch of government should have absolute authority over the others, that a separation of powers must be instituted, as Montesquieu described perhaps 50 years earlier. Yes, this Montesquieuian idea of a separation of powers, of a separate legislature and executive, later a separate judiciary also, the idea was that no one person could become a king in America, could have the entire auspices of the power of the state in one man's hands. So what happened? Well, the founders and the framers of the Constitution said that tax-raising powers must rest with Congress, but not just with Congress, with the House of Representatives specifically, because that body, they say, is closest to the people, elected every 2 years compared to the 6-year terms in the Senate or 4-year terms for the president. They say a majority of the House of Representatives that then gets certified, of course, by the upper house. Of course, any piece of legislation needs to pass both houses, but they said in the Constitution that money bills must start in the House, then pass the Senate, and then get sign-off from the executive, from the president, presidential approval. Now, that would be the process to raise any tax. And the critics of Donald Trump say that he has bypassed that constitutional process, that he has bypassed the idea that you refer to the representatives of the people in the House and instead unilaterally as the executive say that we are going to impose these import taxes. Now, on the other hand, Donald Trump says that he is actually relying on an older piece of legislation passed by Congress back in 1977, dealing with international emergencies. He says these are emergency powers to deal with an international trade emergency. Well, it seems that the International Trade Court has suggested that they do not believe that there is a sufficient emergency to justify the use of this 1977 Act of Congress. Donald Trump says that there is an emergency. The courts say that there isn't. Ultimately, this is not a row that will be settled today, and more will be decided. This could be appealed to the Supreme Court. But therein lies a question. Of course, a majority of justices on the Supreme Court are conservative-leaning justices. A large number of them have been appointed by Donald Trump himself. But traditionally, conservative-leaning justices on the Supreme Court, justices that have been promoted by the Federalist Society, the society that Donald Trump relied upon in terms of selecting his justices, they are what's known as more strict originalists when it comes to the Constitution. They will refer to the intent of the founders of the United States more so than the mores of the time. What will they do? Because this is going to be, if this is referred to the Supreme Court, as seems potentially likely now, what you will have is a bunch of justices appointed by Donald Trump with perhaps torn loyalties. Do they back what Donald Trump is suggesting in terms of giving the president these emergency powers over tax-raising issues? Or will they look at a more strict originalist, constitutionalist approach, which of course has been their hinterland? The issue why they were selected to serve on the Supreme Court in the first place. Ironically, on the other side of the bench is the more liberal justices, those who are more fast and loose, one might say, with the intent of the Constitution, those who are more willing to find modern laws that the original founders wouldn't have originally written in a textual way in the Constitution. Liberal justices who want to find new and flexibility within the Constitution. Well, could it be that they become the far more strict originalists when it comes to the Constitution, in a sort of reversed role? Could that actually take place? Or will it be a strange sort of world where the liberal justices take the Donald Trump executive power position and the conservative judges take the constitutional power position? Because ultimately the United States is not like a country like the United Kingdom. In the United Kingdom, Parliament is sovereign. Anything that Parliament passes, that is the law of the land. Parliament can pass any law to override any judge. That is the system as it has been since at least the Glorious Revolution, although those historians of the 1688 Glorious Revolution will point back to the earlier seeds of the evolution of Parliament in the United Kingdom. In the United States, it's a very different affair. Congress is not sovereign. Donald Trump and the presidency are not sovereign. The courts are not sovereign. The Constitution is sovereign. In the United States, that written Constitution sits above any elected politician or appointed judge. Now, those judges can interpret what the Constitution says, but ultimately it is that document that has the final say on law and the ability of various executive or legislative abilities. Congress can't pass a law that goes against the Constitution. They would have to pass a constitutional amendment, and that is a far wider process. I mean, it requires supermajorities, and it requires majorities of states as well as assent from so many different angles. I mean, supermajorities are required to amend the Constitution. It's quite difficult to amend, and that's why there haven't been so many constitutional amendments. Just 27 constitutional amendments have passed since the 1780s, when the Constitution was initiated, and today, just 27 amendments. So let's zoom out and see where we sit today. Donald Trump says that a 1977 Act of Congress gives him emergency powers to levy tariffs, despite the founders of the United States suggesting that tax-raising powers should rest with Congress. Then what happens is that a federal court says that this Emergency Powers Act does not fit today. There is no trade emergency in the view of the international trading courts. And so you get this impasse, this angry sort of response from the White House, where you've had senior officials say that this is the judges going against the elected president. And while we've heard those words before in the United Kingdom, While we've heard that judges are trying to go against elected politicians, that argument works in the United Kingdom in a way that it doesn't in the United States, at least not always. And that's because in the United Kingdom, politicians make the law. Simple majorities in Parliament can change the law. And it doesn't matter if something is deemed a constitutional issue or otherwise. A simple majority can sort that. And of course, always, a Prime Minister by definition has a majority in the House of Commons. In the United States, you can have a very, very different affair. The president is elected separately from the legislature. There is a separation of powers. The president has a limitation on the powers that the president can put forward. The president has to persuade Congress in a whole raft of areas if he wants to do something, particularly if he wants to raise taxes. And yet, when it came to his enormous new tariff schedules with the world, Donald Trump didn't consult Congress. He tried to pass it unilaterally without going to Congress first. Now, Donald Trump does have a Republican majority in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, albeit a fairly slim majority at that. But you would have thought that a charismatic Republican leader would be able to pass a bill, if he so wished, that instituted new tariffs against China, for instance, or against the European Union, or against any country in the world. It raises a question as to why Donald Trump didn't think, perhaps, that he would be able to get his tariffs through Congress, as to why he chose this emergency powers route, an emergency powers route that the courts have just deemed unconstitutional. But what does this all mean? And what does this mean for Britain? Because there are huge question marks now over the deal that was signed, a reciprocal deal, over tariff schedules between the United Kingdom and the United States. Does that deal now fall away? Do we revert to the pre-Liberation Day tariffs? Or is the UK going to be the only country that maintains these higher tariff levels given that international agreement? It seems that that is unlikely given the role of Congress that the courts have decided must take place here. Could it be that all of that fractured negotiation drops away? Well, perhaps, but perhaps not, because the Trump administration has said that it will continue to fight this. So whilst there has been some market recovery in the East Asian markets already, while we're expecting a rebound in British markets, European markets, and in the New York Stock Exchange, perhaps it won't be a profound rebound because there's still a huge amount of uncertainty here. And markets have hated uncertainty. Since the word go, if you don't know what the taxes are going to be between one country and another, how can you plan for investment or for trade? So this raises a big question. Could this further uncertainty actually be more destabilizing? Could it be that we do not know what the powers of the president are when it comes to levying these taxes in this way? A huge amount of uncertainty remains. And there's one further fly in the ointment for Donald Trump at this moment in time, and that's that his close ally, Elon Musk, has left the government. A special government employee where he could only work for the federal government for 130 days in any given year. Well, that time limit was, of course, fast approaching, and Donald Trump and Elon Musk have had some policy disagreements in recent times. It's clear that Elon Musk was not a big fan of the tariff agenda, even calling Peter Navarro, Donald Trump's chief trade advisor, a word that rhymes with Navarro but begins with R and references very stupid people. This is a difficult and fractured time, perhaps, for some at the top of the Trump regime. Elon Musk is also upset that a spending bill has now passed in Congress that increases the deficit, that wipes out the savings that Musk was trying to make when it came to Doge and his team finding things to cut in the federal budget. Has that work been undone now by the tax cuts, but also spending increases that Donald Trump has pushed through Congress? Well, quite possibly. Although it must be said that the DOGE team, the Department of Government Efficiency, will continue on after Elon Musk leaves the federal government. But this does mean that it's a precarious time now for the President of the United States. We're not quite sure what constitutional power he now has with regard to levying tariffs, his major economic policy. Now, the founders of the United States would say, well, absolutely none without consulting Congress. Donald Trump maintains there's an economic emergency. We'll remain to wait to see what the Supreme Court has to say about that. But the International Trade Court, that federal level court, says that there isn't a sufficient emergency to grant the president these tax-raising powers. And beyond that, we've got Elon Musk returning more to private business, ending his time as a special government employee. That bromance, not parting on animosity, not passing on hard words, passing on affectionate words, but clearly more going on behind the scenes there too. So where does the Trump presidency go from here? And what does this mean for the growth rate in the United States, the growth rate for the United States' allies, and frankly, the entire global trading system? One word: uncertainty. And that uncertainty can be damaging for markets. Markets want that sort of certainty so they can plan, so they can invest, so they can hire people, and so they can, grow the companies that make up that dynamic market economy that we see in the United States and across the world. That uncertainty is going to drag on for some time to come. So perhaps it's time to click that subscribe button and follow all the latest twists and turns in the battle between Donald Trump's White House and the federal courts.